This is a special request from my oldest daughter. I used to make this dish for my kids a lot. My oldest daughter is actually learning how to cook. I talked on the phone today and she asked me about some of my recipes. All my kids loved this recipe. Always a good idea, even if you just washed your hands, if you touched anything, like I just touched these cameras, just get them clean, especially now. You can't be too careful. While we're at it, basil. Into the colander. Rinse it off. Some of this is fresh that we have in a flower pot outside. Some of it is store-bought. The nice thing about basil, you can grow it yourself. The bummer is it doesn't last long. You can find it fresh at most any grocery store. Just buy some. One way to get all the water out is to squeeze it. There's always going to be some water, but that's not a big deal. Since we're using oil, it's good to get as much out as we can because oil and water don't mix. Basil. I use a fancy blender, but I haven't always had it. If you have a basic old Osterizer, any cheap blender, it's fine. I've done this in a mortar and pestle. It's a lot of work. Into the blender with the basil. Always put the basil in first. Next is the pine nuts. I get mine at Costco. It's the best price you're going to find. Trust me on that. Pine nuts are expensive. And if you find a better price than Costco, please send me a message. Let me know. How much do I use? Doesn't really matter. I've never really looked up a recipe. I just instinctually, you know what? I have a lot of pine nuts, I'll use more. I don't have a lot of pine nuts, they're expensive. That's all I got, that's all I'm using. Same with the basil. As long as you don't use too much of the pine nuts, it's kind of hard to do that because you probably can't afford to. No big deal. How much olive oil do I use? Not a whole lot, but enough that it all blends together. And how do you know how much is too much? If there's olive oil floating on the top of your basil and it's just a thin layer, then you use the right amount. If there's no olive oil floating on the top of your pesto when you're done, then you probably didn't use enough. Garlic. I like fresh garlic, but if all you have is garlic sliced up in a jar or garlic powder, it's fine. A couple cloves is sufficient. This recipe, it's really what you like. The amount of this or that you use, you just try it and you'll know. You can put in a tiny bit of salt, pepper, this grinder does a fine grind, this grinder does a coarse grind. We're going more olive oil, I can just tell. We're not there yet. You'll know, as soon as you start blending it, you'll know if there's enough liquid. Parmesan, that's how you tell when it's the real deal. It's got that crust. This is Pecorino. Romano, Parmesan, Pecorino, it's all gonna taste good. How much is up to you? I used to make pesto without any cheese. One day I was talking to somebody, they said, you know there's cheese in that. No, there's not. Next time I made it, I put cheese in it. We use a microplane. Doesn't matter. Any grater, it's going in the blender. Blender's going to blend it up. Plenty of cheese. We got pine nuts, cheese, basil, garlic, olive oil. You'll know it's enough oil when everything's settling back down and blending easily. You can see I'm starting to see some oil in there, so we're pretty close to having enough oil. How much you blend it is really up to you. You can do it rustic, like this, where you still got lots of little bits and pieces, or you can really blend it up. You can also tell that's a very light green color. And that's one way I can tell how much of different ingredients I have and also how fresh my basil is. That color is when you have more cheese in it. If I had less cheese, it would be a darker green. Let's see how it looks. That's looking pretty good. Still a bit rustic. We're going to chop it up a bit more. Those pine nuts are not chopped up as much as I'd like. They make a smaller attachment for this blender, a smaller container, and I need to get that one day. Getting there. I think if anything, I have a little too much oil. You can see it's really viscous. It's moving around easily. It would probably blend better in this blender if I had less oil. That's actually about how I like it. I like it a little bit rustic. The whole pine nuts don't bother me because when I do pesto, I often toast up some whole pine nuts and put them in. Pesto. Next time we'll do it in that blender. We'll see if it works better. I think it will. I've done it in blenders like that one and it works really well. This is a very powerful blender. They make a smaller container. I need to get it.